Hi again. Okay, so I think we'll do quick introductions. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with everyone here, but I'm Sarah from Gamma. Charlie.
Hey everybody, this is Charlie from BitLayer.
I'm Chris from Bob. Nice to meet everyone.
And Marvin from Ryder.
Cool. So we're here obviously to talk about Bitcoin layer 2s and just building on Bitcoin in general. I think for a long time, a lot of us had, looked at Bitcoin as this rock, and we were all poking it like, do something, and everything else was happening on Ethereum, on Solana, whatever other ecosystems. But now we seem to be in this like Bitcoin season 2 sort of thing, and we have like 80 to 100 new Bitcoin L2s and sidechains, drive chains, and whatever coming out. Obviously, you two are both co-founders of two of those layer 2s in sort of very different ways that we'll explore technically up here. And I think let's just have a discussion about, what changed recently that allowed this sort of new wave of just innovative stuff to be built on Bitcoin, because beforehand nothing was really happening for a while except for Lightning and a few other federated chains, but now we are able to actually build on Bitcoin. So I'd love to know what sort of developments happened recently that allowed for, or that just allowed the culture to just start exploring actually building on Bitcoin.
I guess, so there was kind of nothing going on with Bitcoin block space, and I am not a technical person, so please, this is surface level stuff. Ordinals kind of paved the way of we can actually do interesting stuff with block space. I can speak about the BitVM side of stuff and how that got people interested in maybe you can actually do some interesting things with this block space that you have on Bitcoin. And then after ordinals came and actually made something that made sense in comparison to NFTs, I think a lot of interest came from that, and then lots of people saw that maybe you could actually do a bit more. Obviously, we work with BitVM, which uses that block space to do things like fraud proofs and the eventual aim of having an actual trust minimized bridge and something similar to the experience that you have on an L2 on Ethereum. Those things have been in the process of being proved, and that's why I think a lot of people are just kind of coming into the space and seeing what the potential is. So I think it was seeing something interesting that could be done with block space, and then seeing people do actual things that have real world use cases, like ordinals, and then that kind of made a big kind of push, and loads and loads of interest came from that, I think.
Okay, it's a very technical question, but I start from a non-technical aspect. First of all, shout out to Iliana, the organizer. So great to be back in Amsterdam. 6 years of my life was here. I bought my first Bitcoin in Amsterdam Bitcoin meetup. It's one of the first Bitcoin meetup in Europe, all the way from 2010. So Amsterdam is a great place for Bitcoin people like us to come back. And I think we're going to always come back every single year. And it's a great conference week so far. Bitcoin has 15 years of history, right? I remember when I got to know Bitcoin was miners talking about FPGA mining. So it was very miner culture driven, right? They only care about the block rewards, every time you issue a new block. And also they talk about how to maximize their return, right? With seek for the cheapest electricity cost and also seeking for the hardware. And of course, the miners play a major role on that. So that's very miner-driven. There was never a builder-driven. We talk about Ethereum, Solana, a bunch of all the other proof-of-stake chains. Ethereum was proof-of-work, by the way, right? And it was because Bitcoin cannot do that much, right? We had a deep conversation with Vitalik early this year when we started BitLayer. The story when he was writing things in Bitcoin magazine was he wants to bring this programmability on Bitcoin, but he couldn't, right? So, Chris, you mentioned about ordinals. Ordinals was because of taproot asset upgradation, right? So it took 3.5 years for this BIP to get approved. Now we talk about all these things, including CAT, right? BVM getting us excited. It was because also the fundamentals, they doesn't really require another hard fork, right? That's important. Depending, fundamental hard fork from Bitcoin ecosystem it's going to take a while because it's like, one, so much money on the stake. It's going to be a lot of vulnerability, a lot of pros and cons. And building a social consensus in Bitcoin ecosystem takes time. Everything happening in Bitcoin ecosystem takes time, right? Like all this crazy stuff, like people talk about, native ZK snark roll up. It's not happening. It's all work in progress, and probably gonna take another 1.5 year minimum, right, to really achieve that. So I think back to the question. For us, like BitLayer, when we really see the BVM approach, and also we see some interesting momentum when Babylon like providing this solution, right, double signature to seeking native yield from the proof of stake chain, like the Cosmos SDK chains. Those are very interesting idea because it's making the Bitcoin not just as a digital gold, as like this boring asset sitting on your cold wallet, right? All the things you care is the miners approach. They actually expand the ecosystem to, okay, what about we building a programmable trustless environment for all the ETH builders to come over and a bunch of other builders who couldn't really do anything with Bitcoin, right? So we could argue philosophically something didn't exist, there's a reason behind it, right? But we could also argue because of there's no solution, and so that's why certain things didn't exist. What I mean is like when people say, oh, Bitcoin DeFi shouldn't exist because all the miners, all the Bitcoin OGs never actually seek yield. They just want to hold their Bitcoin and sitting in the cold wallets. That happened in the last 15 years, so this shouldn't exist. But we could also argue because there's no solution to support that. That's why those people say, okay, oh, Bitcoin should have no use cases. Everything who built on Bitcoin is all waste of time. It's all bullshit. Like those arguments are kind of gradually evolving, right? And when Ordinals came out, we noticed like a lot of miners were shit talking. Oh, this is all completely garbage UTXO. We shouldn't have these things to ruin Bitcoin as a holy chain. And then they realized, oh my God, we're receiving so much block rewards every single time, right? So tell me more about it, right? Because we're making benefits now. So the beautiful thing is that there's no Ethereum Foundation. Bitcoin Foundation, sort of like respectfully, we don't have to depend on them, right? So when builders like us building interesting stuff, like supporting the previous panel, right, all these builders on the DApp side, if there's a user where you need to pay the fees to use those applications, and the miners have economic benefits on that, then that's the feedback loop. Then we don't actually need to care certain OGs saying this is bullshit or whatever, because it doesn't matter. The consensus is built within the community with this product market fit. It's not just the Satoshi or whatever fake Satoshi people in the HBO, right, saying whatever, and then the community have to follow he or she. It's very decentralized. It's more decentralized than Ethereum because we would argue, I was working in Ethereum ecosystem for a couple of years. Anything Vitalik said, this is not going to work, the community going to follow him, and then probably this project is not going anywhere, right? It goes to DA and a few other things. So that's the beauty of a Bitcoin ecosystem. There's no centralized Satoshi or Vitalik, and the community is kind of figuring out the way of product market fit by itself. And there's new things like BitVM, CAT, a bunch of other things, the governance, which kind of can gradually leave the way.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on some of the cultural and philosophical reasons for, or debates on, why it might have taken some time to build on Bitcoin, but now it's a very decentralized community, and in terms of what people decide to build and what people are interested in now. I'm curious, maybe Marvin, you can answer this because you are a Stacks Core contributor. What are some of the drawbacks as a developer, just building on Bitcoin in general, versus building in the EVM ecosystem, for instance, that sort of has this like very standardized Solidity framework that people can go in, get a lot of support in, and on Bitcoin it's kind of like you have to discover your niche, and whether you're building on a specific type of layer 2 or just contributing to Bitcoin Core, there's a lot of complexity there. So
yes, there is. I want to really quickly, because it resonated a lot what I was hearing over there as well, is if I can share my perspective on this, it's very personal, very singular. So I know there are a lot of people who dabble with all these different ecosystems. For me, it's always like I find one thing that I'm very, very interested in, and that's where I stay. I actually started with Bitcoin and then moved to Ethereum because when Ethereum came out and it became more robust, I'm like, wow, you can do all these things that you cannot do with Bitcoin at all. It's technically impossible. That's how I approached this. And then a few years later, realizing that's not the case, discovering Stacks, which is Blockstack at the time, and seeing how they solve these issues and how this ecosystem has matured, I thought what was really important, what I was hearing was, in the beginning there was a very strong opinion of what Bitcoin should be and what it should be used for, and now it's a much more open marketplace where you basically say, well, if I'm willing to pay the fee and there's a miner willing to mine my transaction, then I get it on chain, right? So whether that means, even though some people hate it, putting a 4 megabyte image on Bitcoin, if people are willing to pay for it, so you create this competitive market where everyone's competing for the same block space, and because it's very restrictive, you have to find something that's very optimized that you can build, that can then scale up, and that what you can use. So going to your question about then building on Bitcoin, at least for me through stacks, I really saw that, for me personally, how they were settling down onto Bitcoin and saying like, well, we can mine blocks and we can have these proofs and settle that on Bitcoin. We do 1 per block, so you got some programmability in Bitcoin, but it's slow, it doesn't have the performance as Ethereum does, and it takes a long time to get to a point where really it can compete in terms of numbers. But I think there's been a mindset shift here where now people are like, I want to have something on Bitcoin. I want to build something on Bitcoin. And I was the same. In the beginning, when I had Bitcoin, I'm like, well, I have my Bitcoin and I want to hold it. And now it's like, now you can actually start doing stuff with Bitcoin in a way that is not, I'll send it to some shady central platform and maybe I'll see it back or maybe I won't. Now you can actually build stuff, what they're doing, to make all these things possible without having to deal with something like that. So to conclude, I think what makes stacks very interesting right now is that just like other projects, they're utilizing something very broad, like Taproot and witness scripts to pack information in there and suddenly create all these features, all these possibilities that we either didn't see before or might have not been possible before.
I want to touch on some more sort of, I guess, drawbacks, or not necessarily drawbacks. Maybe this is one of those things that's like the signal in terms of like Bitcoin and its technical limitations, or again, maybe not limitations, but the fact that there's a 10-minute average block time, which is very slow compared to every other composable smart contracting blockchain out there, which makes it so that transactions settle much slower, and transactions are also much more expensive to do on the base chain. And so, in terms of like building a layer 2 on top of that kind of base chain, does that add to any sort of like complexity there in terms of building for users, because users want scalability, they also want fast and cheap transactions?
I will take the first, I guess. Being slow is not always philosophically bad, first of all. That's our argument, right? There's a lot of chains trying to be the ultra real time, right? Like, there's interesting projects like completely monolithic proof of stake, right? Monad, Mega East, right? They're doing complete different thing. Has nothing to do with Bitcoin. The reason Bitcoin goes this far, has 15 years of history, it still keep going, right? And I'm pretty sure it's going to survive in the next 20 years, is the decentralization level, the highest level of security. That's important. But and people even kind of make a meme out of that, like slow-fi. Being slow, but do some staking is okay. But the reason also why we want to build like another layer outside of Bitcoin L1 is Bitcoin L1 was never designed to be this kind of mass adoption retail chain. A lot of DGen had a lot of fun paying gas fee to the miners to make some interesting garbage UTXOs. Garbage, I'm being funny, right? Like, because I would argue 90% of BRC20 tokens or some of the ordinals is not being traded in the last 2 or 3 months. So we could kind of consider they have no liquidity. It's kind of garbage UTXO. The bad side, the drawback, is if we put every transaction on Bitcoin L1, a lot of UTXO, because there's no black hole wallets, there's no burning mechanism, right? It's always kind of floating in the network. And I think in the long run, it shouldn't be like that. It's kind of a bit dystopia way how Bitcoin L1 should be. And also we have all the institutional money coming in with ETF and so on and so forth. Bitcoin L1 should be like this stable, solid chain. It's going to survive in the next 20 years. Leave all these social experiments, crazy degen stuff alone, right? Not in Bitcoin L1. Move to the meta protocols or some kind of off-chain scaling solution. All leaves to us as L2s or our side chains to really work on. So I think that the other drawback is like, so what's the best approach on that, right? I think in our definition, I think the best like scaling solution around Bitcoin, right, not on the L1, is one, use Bitcoin or Bitcoin aligned version on for DA, data availability, right? Have the layer L1 verification. That's very important, right? State transition should actually verify back to Bitcoin L1 on the blocks. And then we have this like trust minimized bridge, which is also a heavily controversial term right now. Like there's a level of trust minimized, right? I think there's no ultimate holy grail solution right now, like to be 100% trustless. There's still some trust involved, but compared to the MPC multi-sig solution, which poly-market, multi-chain, bunch of those MPC bridges get like 9 figures of money get stolen or drained out or hacked, right? So multi-sig, to some degree, probably the other speaker agree, is not the ultimate solution in the space, right? So there's like BVM2 and a bunch of other ways we're working on in progress, right? We have, none of them actually delivered yet, but it's actually months away from like at least some testnet. So I think these are the three major important things we see the future of Bitcoin ecosystem, right? So again, in a nutshell, leave Bitcoin L1 alone. All these crazy social experiments, leave them alone, right? Don't do too much on Bitcoin L1 because it never designed to be like that. Let us to deliver all kinds of crazy, interesting new stuff for the retail to have fun with it, and also for the institution to do some like real programmable staking, right? Liquid staking, perp dexes, option trading, real world assets. All these fancy buzzwords, you can't really do that in Bitcoin L1. With all due respect, right? Bitcoin L1 can only do basic stuff, which is payment, and some simple stuff like inscribe your interesting asset on Bitcoin block. Outside of that, with all due respect, there's not too many things you can do with it. And it maybe you should never, because you have to have such a high waiting time for the Bitcoin block and fidelity. You have to pay the high gas fees. Good luck paying that, right? And then eventually, after a while, you realize your assets on Bitcoin L1 have very little liquidities, right? Things happening with runes already. So I think that's the reason we should have Bitcoin layers.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot of the stuff. I mean, doing anything on Bitcoin is difficult, and the infrastructure involved is usually very complex. So, like, I definitely agree with Charlie's points. Like, keep it simple and use Bitcoin for what it's good at, and don't like try to say that it's doing more things than it can. Like, all of the stuff that we're doing is focusing on what Bitcoin is good at. I think everyone can agree it's security and it's longevity. Like, that's why investors are interested. That's why anyone that wants to build on it is interested, because if you're going to build something, you want it, and you want investment in that thing, usually anyone that invests in that thing wants it to last for a long time, and therefore having something that settles on Bitcoin is probably the best place to build that. But that doesn't mean that you can do lots and lots of things, and that's why we have our approach, right? Like, we are figuring out the BitVM bridging side of things. We're figuring out how BitVM would actually work. But although the branding's probably a bit off, because it's not an EVM. It doesn't have like the same functionality as EVM. It doesn't have smart contract. Like, it allows for trust minimized bridging and allows for fraud proofs to happen on Bitcoin. And then we take in the infrastructure and all the usability and everything from Ethereum and use all of that for what it's good, and don't reinvent the wheel. There's no need to. Like, Ethereum has been doing an amazing job and making things very, very easy for users and people who want to do things with assets that just haven't been focusing on Bitcoin. And that's our whole approach. Like, take the usability of Ethereum and something, so like we use OpStack for that reason right now. We have all of the integrations that you need, and I've spent a lot of time in ecosystems where you don't have that, and trust me, if you're trying to build something and you don't have that, and you're the one having to broker those deals and get stable coins and get custodians and get exchanges, you want to be focusing on what you do best as a project, and it's not those things. So don't reinvent the wheel, use Bitcoin for what it's good for, which is security, and then solve the other issues with things that are better for that thing. So, I mean, that's our whole process. So, like, have the usability of Base, but then use BitVM to settle on Bitcoin.
Yeah, Chris, you kind of touched on my next sort of topic here, which was how we can make or how you guys think that Bitcoin and Bitcoin ecosystems and L2s are going to interact with other blockchain ecosystems, like EVM or like stocks, for instance.
I think for me it's entirely use case dependent. So what was just being talked about is like how much trust and how much security are you comfortable with to do a specific transaction? And I think that's what it comes down to, at least for me as a user. So if I can imagine a large fund or VC, they want to move a lot of value around, Bitcoin is the best choice to do that very securely. But maybe if I'm trading the newest ordinal or other such token, or I want to launch my own token, maybe that doesn't make sense to put that on Bitcoin directly. So you put that on a layer 2, or maybe even up even more, right? You see many projects now are starting to build games that run on a blockchain or put some of their economy on a blockchain. So there's a lot of interactions, lots of messages going on. Putting that on Bitcoin is just not feasible, obviously. So that's where you need these things. And I think that's where bridges can come in and have that kind of value, right? Before, it's like, okay, I want to play a game that is on Polygon. I need to go on an exchange. I need to buy this token. I need to do all these things. Now you see more innovation with cross-chain messaging. Some more trust minimized than others, but you're always giving up a little bit, right? If you want to have that convenience back. So you're seeing more of that, and it's moving in that direction. And I think for people, it will be, they were always comfortable playing a centralized game, for example. That was always fine with a centralized economy. And now like, oh, no, it would actually be cool if we're not locked in, and we can have that somewhere on chain, and maybe different protocols can do something with that, to give a basic example. And yeah, that makes that very interesting. But do you want to move a lot of value around? Do you want to play a game? Do you want to launch a new token, and you don't want to pay a lot of money to get that done? That's where that is.
Yeah, well, I think the interoperability solution already kind of being solved all the way from Cosmos and Polkadot, right? The very major two cross-chain protocols from 2017. The whole Web3 space have been talking about cross-chain. And we have more than enough chains already, right? So I think the interaction between different ecosystems, it's one way or the other happening. We work with pretty much all the interoperability, like cross-chain bridges across different kind of architecture, right? It's like layer 0, like with DVN. We actually talking to Chainlink with CCIP, and pretty much all the EVM and bridges like Mason, all the others. BitLayer already interact with all of them. Some of them are very trust minimized. Some of them are still kind of multi-sig approach, right? But some users actually prefer that as well. So like, it depends on what people, with different appetite, what kind of things they're looking for. But in terms of the high-level engagement, other ecosystem, like for example, Solana, Barrachain, bunch of others, it's actually, to be honest, competition. We have to face it. Like the real competition, when we talk about all the Bitcoin L2, we kind of PvP each other. I kind of respect the same to all the other founders as well. The real competition is like when people don't actually care about building things on Bitcoin. That's our real competitor, because they care about, degening on Barrachain is actually more fun than Bitcoin. And if everybody actually thinking that way kind of screwed, because Bitcoin infrastructure doesn't make sense anymore. If that's the case of future of Web3, I personally will be very disappointed, and I think that's actually not going to happen. But that's our real competitor, right? We use Bitcoin as gas fee. That's kind of a different, maybe as a Bob's approach. But it's like all this is smaller stuff, right? But I think the real thing makes us, like BitLayer, like how we interact with other ecosystems, is like, do you use Bitcoin L1 as a verification? Do you verify your state transition on Bitcoin? If it's not, like you are not contributing fees to Bitcoin L1 with miners and holders, and then like, do you use Bitcoin Align or even Bitcoin L1 as DA, right? If that's nothing to do with that, then we are essentially competitor. Like no matter it's like proof of stake chain like Cosmos, Solana, like Barrachain, or some kind of proof of work chain like Casper or whatever, because there's no intertwine, right? Assets can bridging, and they are liberal to bridge from one chain to the other. But once it's bridged out, how to bridge back? So it's like something we always care about. Like if a builder wants to say, okay, we're multi-chain, we're omni-chain, we're gonna build it with many different chains. We said, like, first of all, definitely do that. Feel free, right? We're not gonna sign some weird non-exclusivity because I feel it's very anti-liberal, like anti-free market. We never do that, and I think any chain do that. For me, it's kind of weird, and it's even stupid, with all due respect. But once the TVL is bridged out to other like ecosystem, which is completely nothing to do with Bitcoin, that means like one piece of liquidity is moved out of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So that's not a real competition, right? So I think hopefully with all the infrastructure we are delivering, people are going to realize you can actually do meaningful stuff around Bitcoin ecosystem. Use Bitcoin as a denominator assets, right? But paying Bitcoin as gas fee and so on, but much smaller than the Bitcoin L1. So stay things with Bitcoin and with Bitcoin culture is actually cooler than some weird chain which is managed by, let's say, 20 different validator assets, haven't really been battle tested in the last couple of cycles, just because some VC backed them and they are kind of cool and they claim they have, they have some airdrops. I think that's different, right? So when we talk about competitors, those new guys with some weird new term, like those are the real competitor with our Bitcoin folks.
Do you feel like there's any infrastructure or consumer dApps that are really missing from the Bitcoin space that you want to see built? Because like, when I look at chain usage, for instance, and I look at some of these other blockchains, especially the new ones that are coming out, like Sui or Berachain, people seem to just have developed this monoculture on those chains to do like some specific thing. And it seems like on Bitcoin, at least to me, like having been in the space for all these years, people are sort of all doing their own little back end, like hyper niche things. And ordinals was kind of really the first consumer meta that came about that brought a bunch of people together that started, getting consumers to have fun on Bitcoin again. What do you guys think is really missing from the Bitcoin space? Just that you want to see from builders and founders, aside from, all these new Bitcoin L2s that are being built. What should be built on top of those Bitcoin L2s? What sort of applications, what infrastructure is needed?
I mean, the one thing that is missing hugely in the Bitcoin L2 space is actually a good bridging solution. There's many different ways in which people are doing it, but a lot of it is kind of various versions of multisig, which, I mean, as Charlie was saying, like it's good enough for some things, but it's really not the kind of thing that we're looking for. Especially with Bitcoin. Like the whole thing and the reason why anyone has Bitcoin is because it's the safest one. And well, I mean, what's the first thing that you think of when you hear bridge? Probably risk or hack or like all of these things that should never be associated with Bitcoin. So I mean, figuring out a very good trust minimized bridging solution that actually works and like the around making that work, like DA solutions on like if we do it optimistically and things like that, like having Bitcoin as a DA layer doesn't make sense because it's really, really expensive, especially in the early days, right? Like eventually when economies of scale take hold and like there's a huge amount of coming through these bridges and things like that, it would make sense. But for the kind of scaling up in the early days, if someone can figure out like a good solution, there's solutions like cool stuff going in with staking, like Babylon and things like this. But I mean, there's a lot that can be done in that area to make the whole process more secure and more user-friendly as well.
I'm going to take that in a little different direction, this question. When you said what should be built, I thought like, well, for me, there are many people always talk about shoulds or should not. This should not exist on chain, and people have very strong opinions on that. I personally believe it's a free market of ideas and technologies, and that's why I don't mind niche chains. I don't mind niche protocols, even if they get people hyped up and VCs come in, as long as they're not scamming people, of course. And if people find value in these things, and they use that, right? And me personally, I make my choice of what kind of protocol I trust enough to use or not. But what, of course, is difficult with that is me as a technical person, I can dive into that deeper than other people can. So what I think is still very necessary is that there's more of a component there that people that are not highly technical have some way to figure out, like, is this something that I want to use and want to do? But where I think still a lot of work is to be done, and that's why we're doing Ryder, actually, plugging it there, is the wallet side and having your assets and being able to back those up and being able to transfer that over time and still be able to access them. and also thinking about things like inheritance or joint access to tokens and key rotation and all these things. Because when we started working on Ryder and we started doing our research, what we noticed is that most people, at least in the ecosystems that we work in, they don't lose their tokens because they get stolen or scammed or hacked. They lose it because they don't know how to manage a seed phrase, they don't know how to back it up, they might have even done that wrong, or they feel like, I have this seed phrase, this is a piece of paper that could be worth so much money. How, up until this point, there were very few people that could say, like, I have this one thing in my hand, and this represents so much value that I don't even feel safe to put it in my house. So how do you deal with that new paradigm, especially if you're a new user? That's why you see so many people moving to centralized exchanges, because they don't have to shoulder that responsibility. And yeah, we talk to people, they say like, well, I had the seed phrase, I cut the piece of paper in two, I gave one to my mom, and then she lost it. So seed phrase gone. And then they don't notice that because their Trezor still works, and then at some point it breaks, and it's over. So for me personally, that's where I think a lot of work is also still to be done, and what we are focusing on. I think, yeah, the backup solutions for crypto is not yet solved. There's more work to be done there.
Chris mentioned about bridges. There's at least like 9 figures of assets being hacked or drained out because of the bad design of bridges. You mentioned about account abstraction, where a lot of the people lost their wallets because they forgot about their seed phrase, their bad management on their private keys and so on. Those are very important stuff, right? I think, but your question is what's missing, right? What's missing is not just we copy paste what are actually missing on Ethereum. A lot of things happen in Ethereum already, kind of trial and error things. There's a lot of like learning lesson. Things worked, things didn't work. But what makes Bitcoin unique? I've talking to like ETF firms, right? I would argue this cycle, there's fundamentally nothing new in retail application yet. Last cycle we have gaming, right? We have metaverse, all these interesting, maybe fake, maybe real trend, right? And some worked out, some didn't work out. This cycle, I think fundamentally new thing was a lot of new buyers now engaging Bitcoin assets because of ETF, right? We have 9 figures, maybe 10 figures now, right, of buying pressure from all the ETF firms like BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, like 21 shares. All these guys like actively buying Bitcoin as assets. They're engaging these assets as alternative assets. This is new. Didn't happen last cycle. It happens in this cycle. So I think what makes sense for Bitcoin uniquely in Bitcoin ecosystem is maybe this word, which is very broad out of sort, we need to define well, is real world assets, right? Well, like for the TradeFi folks, are the people who never actually engage with Web3 assets, right? To engage, I think that's the very important, like CDFI or kind of a DeFi, but with like real world asset approach to design. We have a few protocols in our ecosystem that actually actively exploring that. So the yield seeking side is still Web3 native. We're looking at all kinds of yield based on the native yield, like the Babylon as other restaking protocol or gas fee revenues, how they get additional yield. But the collateral actually come from real world assets and things like that. I think that's something very new. I don't think that's going to happen in Barrett chain or whatever proof of stake chain, with all due respect, because one, Bitcoin required no education, right? TradeFi people is not going to trust any weird VC-backed new chain out of sudden. They're going to take another 5 years to really gain their trust, or maybe never, because they probably will be dead by that time, right? And then TradeFi people, because of ETF, they're going to access to that more and more. We're going to see another couple billion buying pressure in the upcoming months. No other assets can actually have that, right? Ethereum is actually net negative, right, based on the data. After Ethereum ETF came out, Grayscale has been selling, right? So, and Solana, good luck with the ETF. And I'm pretty sure next 6 months, Solana doesn't have the ETF. So it's like an unfair advantage for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem to do things around it. And that's very unique, because only Bitcoin has 15 years of history. Only Bitcoin ecosystem has history as this element. With all due respect, all the other proof of stake chain, most of them haven't really survived across 2 cycles. So a lot of them actually already dead or become like irrelevant after 2 cycles. So that's something unique in Bitcoin ecosystem because of history, because of ETF.
I really appreciate all of your insight that you guys have shared with us today. I think just to close out, given that we have this Bitcoin resurgence happening this cycle, how bullish does that make you?
I mean, obviously, I am biased, but very. So, I mean, everyone that I speak to, and I speak to a lot of people with Bitcoin, I speak to a lot of people involved in Bitcoin, I speak to a lot of people who literally just like heard about it for the first time, but everyone, the value prop is so simple with a Bitcoin L2. Like it's just like, imagine you could do one or two of the things that you could do on Ethereum, but with 100 times the volume, and with the Bitcoin ETFs and all this kind of stuff. Like it's a very simple thing to understand for a lot of people, and you just need one use case to go to, like Charlie's point. Like it just needs to be simple, because these people are very, very risk averse. They don't want to do a huge amount of things, but I mean, imagine being able to use Bitcoin and borrow against it without wrapping it. Like, that in itself is one of the biggest use cases that will ever be in crypto, because arguably Bitcoin is the best asset, like you could argue is the best asset in comparison to anything. So it would be the best thing to borrow against. And there's just a few small things that need to be changed and a bit of traction in terms of institutional adoption, but it is the one that makes the most sense and has had the most trust for the most amount of time. And as everyone's been saying on these panels, like the issue has always been people get into Bitcoin, it has all the traction, and then they go elsewhere to do something interesting. With the stuff that like Bitcoin L2s and Charlie's doing with his team and we are doing, and Stacks as well, like it's allowing people to start on Bitcoin, stay in Bitcoin, and make interesting stuff that actually makes sense with the largest amount of liquidity. And that in itself makes me very bullish. Like there's 0.1% of Bitcoin utilized right now. In DeFi, there's in Ethereum, it's about 30%. That's 300x just in that. Like the numbers speak for themselves, and Bitcoin's been around for a very, very long time for a reason, and it just makes sense to do something with it. And now that we can, I mean, it's a very exciting time to be around.
Yeah, in the end, when you talk to people on the street, most will have heard of Bitcoin, the others not so much. And now I have a lot of friends who were never they're not technical, they were never into crypto. They start to get Bitcoin now. They start to get a non-custodial wallet, because everyone has seen on the news what happened to some of these exchanges that won't be named. And beyond that now you have people asking like, okay, now I have my Bitcoin, can I put my Bitcoin to use? If you look at a neo-banking experience with just normal fiat money, they can create a savings account, they do a term deposit, they do some stuff, and they can make their money work for them in some ways. And now that you teach them, or they start to realize like, hey, you can actually do this with Bitcoin in a way that is also non-custodial, so you don't have to lock it up in an exchange somewhere to still generate a yield. And the concept of having money or value that is programmable is, yeah, people are starting to realize that, and that's very exciting. So even today, everybody knows Bitcoin, but so that's where it's going to be.
The question is, what are we bullish, right? Or why we are bullish? I'm just trying to understand.
How bullish are you?
How bullish? Oh, come on. If we're not bullish, we're not in this event, right? I mean, I think that by default, we're bullish on Bitcoin. Bitcoin going to the moon for 100%, but how much moon, right? I think there's different factors. We trying to bring activation, transactions, use case around Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Because that's important. Because if we just rely on back to this like miner driven, oh, it's kind of another halving, right? You know, we talked to a lot of miners this week, including marathons, right? Like gold mining, you know, great builders here, and soul miners, a bunch of others like Spider Pool and Pool. Those folks has been in the Bitcoin space for a while, much longer than us actually, right? We are the kind of the new pioneer or some of the outliers, right, in front of them, because we want to bring transaction back to Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin as assets being great, right? Because of ETF, a lot of the assets trading being moved to the ETF firms, centralized exchanges, or other trading desks, which is centralized. It's not on chain. So what is bullish? I'm very bullish on moving activation and the activities on Bitcoin as a network. As assets, the price is going to go up one way or the other, right? But we have the cycle. It's going to go up and go down. But what's fundamentally can move the needle is, and actually make Bitcoin as a network survive in the next 50 years, not just 15 years, right? and then we have other, whatever weird chain come and go. But what makes Bitcoin survive another 50 years is bring the activation and on-chain activities around the Bitcoin ecosystem. So all the L2s, the side chains like us, what we build, is contributing to the future of Bitcoin. Because if we have another 3 rounds of halving, why miners still want to pay all the electricity fee with 3 rounds of halving? So you're like, let's say we have a crazy scenario, right? Bitcoin really goes to like $500,000. But like 3 rounds of halving, and you are going to pay maybe 5 times more electricity fee, right? Because of the competition, difficulty and so on. What keeps Bitcoin going? It's actually the weird shit we have to actually, bring back to Bitcoin, right? When people kind of saying all these on-chain garbage UTXO, on the weird, social experiments, doesn't make any sense. Like, what actually keep the Bitcoin running, right? Because we already have ETF. So what's next? You can't have another ETF, which is like great like TradeFi engagement. So I think this is something keeps things going. If we really want to have another 50 years of Bitcoin like ecosystem and a Bitcoin network, we need to bring all these things and activation around Bitcoin and generating fees and actually incentivize other miners to continue maintain the network. Because at the end of the day, those are the people who pay the security cost. If nobody is paying security costs, why people can maintain the network, right? And it will be a very dystopian world. We have another hard fork and another argument. Oh, we don't need the Bitcoin anymore because this centralized chain called Solana is the best chain in the world. So we don't need a Bitcoin on that. It will be very weird, right? So I think that's bullish. Like, we build the infrastructure, we move all the on-chain activation around Bitcoin.
Thank you so much, guys. Please give our wonderful panelists a round of applause.